Welcome to CACOR Live. Because one of our speakers had to drop out at the last minute, we were facing a time of dead air. And we put our heads together and decided to try something different, to use it as an opportunity to do something else with CACOR Live, and this is it. And so if you have comments, we'd love to hear from you, whether you're watching it live or later by video. What we're going to do is watch a 17-minute recent video done by Nate Hagens. If you don't know Nate's work, it'll be a lovely introduction to it. If you do, then you're used to the fact that he does personal statements, which he calls franklies, from time to time. And this is his most recent frankly, which I found particularly interesting. And so what we'll do is listen to that and then break up into small groups of 3. Before we break up, I will review the process and the questions. The questions are already in the chat. We'll be fine. I want to thank you for coming in whatever language you speak or whatever language you're familiar with. We've chosen the title, Do You See What I See? Testing Our Capacity for Deep Learning. The language of deep is showing up in all kinds of places, from deep time to deep knowing to deep transformation, deep adaptation with Jim Bendel. And so that metaphor deep is interesting because it suggests that we need to get under the surface of things and look more carefully. And of course, that's what deep learning is about. And this lovely quote from Langdon Gilkey, University of Chicago, that human freedom in history never means the freedom to avoid the fundamental trends of an epoch. That you can do all the foresight you want, but fundamentally, the big trends of history that are happening at the time you're in are the ones you're caught in. And therefore, deep learning to help understand those is wise. So our process: to watch Nate's frankly, break up into groups of 3, and just take a minute in your small group to make sure you know each other, or have some familiarity with each other. It may be you were 3 people you know, or there may be 2 other strangers. And then give each person a couple of minutes to respond to the first question. So as you go around that first round, don't ask questions, don't break in. Even if you're excited and it's important, try to contain yourself so that everybody gets to make their first offering. And then after that, engage in a conversation with each other. And if one of you would keep track of time, roughly 15 minutes in, there's a second question. And of course, if you decide to spend all the time in the first question, there's no points off. We're not going to take you out to the woodshed. And then, of course, we'll come back to offer highlights to the whole group. So here are the 2 questions to keep in mind as you're listening to Nate. What did you hear from Nate about what he is learning that maps onto or even challenges your own learning journey? That's question 1. Question 2, what did you hear from Nate that surprised you, that you didn't expect to hear, and or that disturbed or worried you? And of course, you can see from those questions that Nate has some interesting things to say. And so we're going to turn to that now. And so I'll stop sharing that. And Dave, if you will put up Nate's video, then we'll spend the next 17 minutes listening to Nate Hagens.
I can't hear him.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about my experience because greetings. I cried unexpectedly 3 times last week. And I'm really tired. I'm just back from New York, but I want to talk about my experience because it uh, has much larger implications for what I might refer to as the shadow of the carbon pulse or the shadow of the superorganism. Um, First time I cried is I had to put down my 14-year-old coonhound, Maisie, last week. I knew it was coming. She had cancer. She was going downhill. But when we put her down, she was just the sweetest girl. And all the memories of the last 14 years, her as my friend, as part of my family, came flooding back. And yeah, I cried, which is appropriate. Dogs are family. The next time was in New York last week for Climate Week. I went to a movie screening of a movie called Future Council, which is 8 12-year-old children from around the world went to talk to a bunch of corporate leaders about climate change and the environment in the future. And it was kind of loosely based. The monster in the movie was called Groth, which was loosely based on the economic superorganism. And something about the way that 12-year-old children can unlock one's heart and speak the truth that adults feel but can't articulate opened up something in me, and I welled up at the United Nations showing. The third time was at the inaugural planetary health check meeting announced by the Planetary Guardians, and Mampela Rampelli was there, and Carlos Nobre, and Cristina Figueres, and all kinds of people talking about, and Johan Rockström led it off. They all talked about how our planetary health check is leaving the stability of the Anthropocene, and it's very precarious. Positive feedbacks loom, the Amazon forest turning to savanna, climate, oceans, and how this is all critical to save humans and our future society and civilization. And at the end, Jane Goodall spoke. I'd never seen her in person before. And she's like, everything that was said was so important, but we neglected to mention that not only is it important for humans, but for other non-human animals. And she ended with a greeting, a chimpanzee vocalization. And unbidden, I just completely welled up with tears, and my heart came up in my throat. And I don't know if other people had that same reaction, and maybe it was an externality of my dog just dying, but you feel the urgency and salience of this species level moment of this one planet in the universe that we know of to harbor life and complex life and the stakes of our times. And so I think it was appropriately emotional. What I want to talk about today is, this podcast, my work, my presentations, my Franklies. I'm known as a systems scientist, energy, human behavior, ecology, money, how things fit together. But there is a very real, embodied, emotional underpinning to our experience, our lives on the earth. And I just want to riff on that a little bit. So that's going to be today's topic. I'm just going to share a couple stories. So in New York, I met someone who just sold his company for like hundreds of millions of dollars. And he had followed the podcast, and he's like, I am becoming aware of my time on this planet where I have to do good and do what the right thing is. So I've been learning from you. And we had just a really good meeting. Then I went to a party. And I wrote a note as I was going into the party that I need to call my friend in California who introduced me to this guy and said, we had a great meeting. So I wrote myself a little note on my phone. I go into this party and I was early and there was only one person there. I didn't know the person and I introduced myself. I'm like, how do you know the people here? He's like, oh, this guy in California introduced me. And it was the same guy that I'd just written a note. And there were like 10 of these things happened in the last month, these little serendipities that you think about someone or you worry about something, and then all of a sudden it happens. And I told this to this guy that I had just met. He's like, oh, yeah. He's like, I was in the Amazon a few years ago and I befriended one of the shamans down there. And they said, when these things happen, these serendipitous things, that's what's supposed to happen. It's when they don't happen that you're out, that you're non-aligned. And when they do happen, you're in the zone and you're doing the work that you're supposed to. So I am historically anyways, a materialist, not like a consumer. I'm not talking about material things. I'm talking about a material explanation and understanding of our world. And I still am. But there are things that happen that I cannot explain. Here's an, and I'm not going to go woo here. You don't need to worry about that, but I know a lot about the global macroeconomy. I don't know a lot about the more spiritual side of the human predicament. So I'm like a kindergartner there, and I'm learning. But a couple weeks ago, something really interesting happened, and I was in ceremony with 5 other people, all of one of which I had known and trusted. They're deeply working on the meta crisis. And we were talking deeply about this stuff for several hours. We were holding hands. And I was talking about an experience where someone emailed me a nasty email and wanted to be on the podcast and wondering why I wasn't inviting her. And I referred to her as this psycho woman who emailed me. And then we talked for a few more minutes. And then the guy next to me, yes, I was holding hands with a man. It was okay. He's like, did you notice that the energy field between the 6 of us dropped when Nate referred to this woman as psycho? And I instantly knew it myself. As soon as I said that, I felt some disturbance in the force. And so then we talked about it. But in the interviewing few weeks, I have stopped short of using adjectives or pejorative language to describe people. And I'm like, what's up with that? I was with 6 people, or 5 other people that I trusted. And we had a beautiful experience and came away like closer friends and bonded. And the only scientific explanation that I have is that was a deepening of my recognition and embodied perception that everything is connected, that we're connected to nature, we're connected to each other. Yes, multi-level selection and such is still operative in our past, but there is a connection. And if we're connected to everyone, I don't have to hang out with everyone. I don't have to like everyone, but I should probably have compassion and tolerance for everyone. So it's like this speed bump has been placed in my mind where I don't like bitch about someone or call them an idiot or psycho or anything. I saw that person is having some troubles right now or some challenges. It's just very interesting. So I also went to this sound meditation in New York and saw a wild disparity of responses and grief and suffering and trauma just under the surface. And this is all to say that the carbon pulse and the economic superorganism, we focus on the material and economic benefits that all this fossil energy and materials and complex technology and just-in-time conveniences for us have delivered. But as we've gone up this curve, there's a corresponding declining curve underneath, which is we've created systems where profit has been prioritized over our consciousness of people, of all living things, of the environment. We're becoming divided from within, the feminine and the masculine, yin and yang within us. We're polarized in society. We're fractured. People's nervous systems are completely on edge, and I think there's this giant societal root canal appointment on November 5th or whenever the election date is, and people know that things are going to get crazy no matter who wins, and we're all carrying that. We are a species out of context, completely divorced from our ancestral conditions on the Pleistocene, when we had 150 people plus or minus we lived with for our entire lives. And I think, we've lost our moral compass. So much of the technology and riches and wealth of the world in our global North society. And by the way, everything I'm saying here largely applies to the United States, which is where I live. So I don't want to speak for other places, though I'm sure they rhyme. But we get the reward without the work. People are addicted to pornography, where they have the orgasm that is completely divorced from the tenderness, the intimacy, and the human touch. We have stock options and stock trades, which give us instant dopamine reward, unrelated to the long work that gave us killing and stalking an antelope and bringing meat back to our tribe. There's lots of things we do that are dopamine centric, but our nervous systems, our limbic systems, our reptilian fight or flight systems are really in bad shape as a culture. One of the richest societies that's ever lived, and we live in a sick society, mentally and physically. Not everyone, of course, but we've got the elites and the military and the government who are living high, riding high in the superorganism. And then we've got the people that are attached to them. And then there's people that are trapped in their daily jobs, just trying to do meaningless stuff to get a paycheck. And then there's a lot of people that are completely untethered and unsupported. And I feel deeply that mental health and resilience is about the most important thing that's going to be needed in our country in the next 5 years. So if you take Marvin Harris's cultural materialism framing, which I've talked about a lot, we have the infrastructure on the bottom, which is the energy and the environmental waste capacity and what sort of technology and all that. Above that is the social structure, which is our laws and our institutions and our economic policies. And above that is the superstructure, which is our ideas and our beliefs and the morals and such. But what he didn't talk about is potentially a circle that surrounds those three things, which is the health and the nervous systems of the individuals that comprise the society that's being studied. And I think we could even go a step beyond that and make that circle a sphere, which represents the emergence and the connections between the humans in proximity. I was in New York and I was with these 8 people in a circle. We just stood around by these cupcakes in a room at this party on Friday night. And they were talking about this energetic field. And I'm like, energetic field, come on. But I looked it up this weekend, and humans have an electromagnetic field that goes 8 feet. And it comes from the heart, not from the head. It's from the heart. And you can measure people's reactions. And if you go beyond 6 feet, is it 6 feet or 8 feet? I forget. But if you're like it's 6 feet, because at 8 feet, you no longer feel that. And at 2 feet, it's like really intense. So there is some sort of a non-quantifiable, but also non-woo energetic field when people get together. That's also something we've lost, because the carbon pulse has allowed us to just order stuff from brown boxes and sit in our living room and consume dopamine and without any of the social benefits that we used to consume things, and by drawing down the health of our ecosphere at the same time. Don't know what the conclusion is, other than there is a shadow of the superorganism, and despite all the stock market at all-time highs, the real stock market, which is the biosphere, is at all-time lows, and a lot of people are suffering and anxious and depressed. And I don't think our nervous systems are that healthy. And yes, as a host of this show, I plan to continue to drill down on the energy, natural science, economics, bend not break interventions for the coming decade. But I also am going to explore the shadow of the superorganism, which is the stuff on the liability side in our society. But there's a tiny, tiny sliver on the positive side that the carbon pulse and the superorganism have enabled. They've enabled in me this recognition, and maybe it's this change in awareness, this change in consciousness, this change in perspective of the critical moment that we're all alive and sharing this conversation together. Maybe that's starting to bubble up. Maybe something is happening that is a little bit woo. I don't know, but I'm going to continue to explore this. And at the risk of seeming woo to some of you hardcore left brain scientists, I won't do it all the time, but I will once in a while. Namaste. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
My wonderful welcome comes to you from the forests and hills of Gombe National Park in Tanzania. The sound that you would hear if you came, some of you have been, but if you go to Gombe and climb the hills in the morning, the sound of a chimpanzee greeting the day, announcing, here I am, who's out there? Oh. Hello.
Thank you, Dave. So I'm going to now put you in small groups, just a minute that to sit with whatever it is you're feeling and thinking in response to Nate's frankly. Just ignore what I'm going to do, and you will, on your screen, you'll be invited to participate in a group. You'll need to click yes, and then you can meet your colleagues and get on with these questions. They are in the chat. If as a group you want to go back and say, what's the question again? You'll find them there.
Okay, I'm going to put the recording on hold.
And you can use this time to comment on something that occurred in your group or some other thought. What we're interested in are just your reflections on what you were hearing and its significance in Nate's talk.
Okay, so I could speak to that.
Okay, it would.
Are you speaking for your group or yourself?
No.
We heard each other and we concurred.
Both.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Summarize for us then.
Okay, well, it's not going to be that. It's necessarily a summary, but what was interesting for me was that he was talking from a very personal basis of experience, and my not from what, I have come to talk about male totalizing theories, which is, the viewpoint of trying to make sense of the world and the physical world and all its aspects, et cetera, and but he was trying to get at some other organism which was there enveloping it. And he was using personal stories. And I will use a personal story to express that in a dance group that is developing choreography, we're now working on you don't see me, you don't hear me. And what's fascinating is as we do this work and as we move along and don't see and hear each other, what becomes manifest is the pain that people are holding from not being seen and not being heard. And that is a bond that we all share, facing what's happening to our world. And there was a talk about there were some points, what he was saying, there are some points when you looked at his graphs of, I guess, the points of where new beginnings, or I don't know the words, where something could happen to our consciousness. It is when we can start to feel solidarity, even with those, as he said, that, would have in the past, he would have hurled she's psycho or whatever, but hold it in and have compassion because they are where they are because of the circumstances of their lives. And when you get there, you have more capacity for solidarity with the humans that we all are. And yeah, so I guess I would like my Claude to also express himself.
That's a very good summary. I'll just mention that I wrote down when you told me that this dance group that you don't see me, you don't hear me, is called a Solidarity Choir, and I wrote that
that's
down.
Something else. There's the Solidarity Choir where I was singing against fracking at the CBC yesterday is a different
Okay.
group. Yeah.
But when I heard Nate, that's basically what he's talking about, is solidarity, even with the people who not too long ago he would just write off as a psycho. And so the other thing that a slightly negative thought, because that's who I am, I guess, he's a public speaker with a popularity and a following. He has to end on a note of, positivity. So without really giving any data, he just shows a sliver of an uptick of what is this? Our attitude is getting better. And, that's probably what's going to be required. But there is sort of a denierism in the way that he concludes, is that, well, without the woo, we're all going to be pulling together. And the implication aspirationally is that we're going to attack this. But that's all I think came out of my memory of this.
That you were room 5, were you? I believe so. I'm just trying to keep.
I didn't notice that it told us, but I'll let Ruben tell you.
We were in room 5. Yes. There's a
Okay.
lot more we could say, but we wanted to hear from the others.
Okay, maybe we should get someone who was in room 1 to speak for room 1. Who can do that?
I could, but Chloe could, and so could Lena. I don't even see you here, folks.
But that's okay. They
Okay.
may have the video turned off.
Yeah, all right. So, well, we talked about what surprised us and what surprised me anyway, and we discussed it was this electromagnetic field that seems to stretch from 0 to almost 8 feet. And as a physician, I was not aware of that, but I can sort of believe it. It's maybe, if that's true, and maybe there are other things, visually, things radiate from people that are not verbal too. We have body language, and we have expressions, and we tend to know how others are feeling just by looking at them sometimes, and maybe not even people, dogs too. So we know when our dog is sick. Doesn't have to tell us in words. But to bring it down into practical sessions, practical senses, maybe being on Zoom so much ever since COVID, if this is true that there is a electromagnetic field, and if it's true that part of what connects us to other people is body language and a sort of more of a nonverbal sense, then we're missing that by being on Zoom. I think it's one reason why I really like to go to CACOR's in-person meetings. But if they were all in person, I guess we wouldn't be joined by, I think Lena said she was in Europe right now. So anyway, we lose some things and we gain others. The other thing I think had to do with the sense of a superorganism. And so the shadow of the superorganism, and that was sort of not only woo, but made us think a little bit harder. And the fact that Nate is a systems person made me think of Donella Meadows' book called Thinking in Systems. And she does have a chapter on hierarchies and super hierarchies and the duty of a hierarchy, of being high in the hierarchy of systems. And we have to accept, according to her, that we're all connected in some way, even connected with the planet, that we're maybe being affected by large organizations, for example, that are high in their super hierarchical, but they don't necessarily care about those of us who are in smaller systems the way that Donella Meadows thinks they should. And in fact, it's just the opposite. They tend to use us. They tend to break rules or bend rules. That's another Meadows concept, and make their own rules. So that leads to a sense of anxiety and real powerlessness. So we are somewhat of a sick society, I think, because of that. We suffer from anxiety and maybe even a sense of emptiness that I think maybe Nate expressed when he was talking to his friend who just sold his business for many, many millions of dollars, but on the other hand, still felt the need to talk to Nate for a long time and connect. So it's not always in being successful in business, even though people strive to do that. Lena or Chloe, pitch in here if I've missed anything.
Yes, I'd like to bring up the planetary health check, what was mentioned in connection of Johan Rockström. I don't really know what Nate wanted out of that. He didn't go deeper into it. Anybody else on that?
Maybe the planet is one of these super hierarchies that is nonverbal and has started to not care about us necessarily if we don't carry out our responsibilities. Just a thought.
Chloe, you had something?
Well,
Makes me think
yeah,
of Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis.
Sorry, who said that?
Your comment, Barry, made me think of Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis or Gaia hypothesis that was circulated in the 80s. It was quite an interesting, innovative idea, somewhat like the limits to growth stuff, but in a different scale, looking on the planetary relationship between living systems and the planet itself.
Right. So Gaia.
James Lovelock was the chap's name. He was an independent scientist, philosopher.
And some people take it literally. You can also just look at it as an analog. But the Earth as an organism might be sloughing off a bothersome parasite that is endangering the body.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just make a comment on this? Because it fits right in, and it's where Ladith and I started off a little bit. So that every level of organization of matter has a corresponding level of consciousness. And with that, the matter-spirit divide is a false one, that everything has both elements. And, you're talking about an organism, a organization. You've got an organization of a lot of humans, and it's got a consciousness that's greater than the sum of the parts. You have a planet that's organized, and clearly it's got the capacity to show a consciousness that's, remarkable. So that just fits into the discussion.
Well, thank you.
And someone from room 2 want to pick up and say, summarize what you concluded?
Yeah, we sort of went a bit everywhere on this, but a few things stood out. So the issue about the pejorative statement, I think we all agreed that that's something that calling people names doesn't really help with anything, right? And like someone else said, I think as Fernand said that people are where they are based on their lived life and where they're, what they know, who they know, et cetera, et cetera. So they have opinions based on something that's true for them. So it doesn't make them idiots or whatever. Not that they can't be idiots, but that's possible. But it's not because they have an opinion that they're idiots, right? The connection stuff. Certainly myself personally, I see the everything on the planet being interconnected by the fact we're on the same planet, and physical processes and physics and chemistry makes all this stuff work together. Certainly don't see any spiritual links there, but that's myself. The thing about the energetic field makes me think about something that I heard about homeopathy that says that if it actually works, we call it medicine. So it would surprise me that there wouldn't have been something like that would have been discovered before that would have an impact. The other thing is social media in particular. What social media has done is maybe it's isolated some people and divided people, but it gives you an opportunity. And again, someone mentioned earlier to interact with people that you would normally not be able to interact with when before we had any kind of technology, as was said in the presentation, we'd interact with maybe 150 different people throughout our entire life. Well, I was looking at my links in LinkedIn today, and I've got 600, and they're not all there, right? So I've interacted with tons of people, learned lots of stuff from all sorts of people. So there's some bad and some good to that. Do we really need to be in the same room to be able to interact? Maybe the interaction would be richer if we're person to person. I certainly believe that, because you see the body language and all that. But it doesn't mean that, being isolated physically, that we're isolated from each other, right? I think that's pretty well it. Unless someone else in the group wants to chime in.
Anybody else from room 2 want to say something? If not, we'll move on to room number 3. Is there someone who can speak up?
Yeah, I got a couple of things. First of all, I had never heard the term carbon pulse before. We discussed this a little bit and decided that he actually didn't mean carbon pulse. It's an energy pulse. And it has resulted in the development and running of in particular the American economy, but also all of the economies around the world. I guess the big question that we found is, what does this add to the discussion? And we came up with a question: does sharing pain actually help much? And we came to the conclusion that we don't think sharing pain is going to do much of anything to resolve, well, let's call it the poly crisis. And that led us to a quick discussion of the fact that US wealth, in particular, won't last. Without fracking, the US would be hooped. And it's currently running out of resources. It's going to run out of resources before the Russians and the people in the Middle East run out of resources. And the world is going to change drastically when that happens. Charlie, in particular, put up a little graph that showed this energy pulse and then a decline in economic activity into a post-industrial era that might last quite a while. And my experience in ecology is that's not what happens. When you get something like an energy pulse, after the energy is gone, the population goes to extinction.
That's
And
a pleasant
I
thought.
want to come back later to this thing about the consciousness, depending on levels of organization. I have a real bone to pick with that. So Charlie and Peter, got anything to add?
It's interesting that Dave and I both call ourselves ecologists, and I have a tail on my graph and he doesn't. So that shows you that you can't believe anything you hear from an ecologist, because we can easily find another ecologist to give you another opinion.
Yeah, but we're not like lawyers, put two lawyers in your room and you'll get three opinions.
Yeah, well, I don't. Who knows what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to be, but I can promise you it's going to be, the world's energy situation is going to be different in a generation or maybe a decade. Really, really different, and people don't have a clue. The media, the people out there, the politicians certainly, and Trump says drill, 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 but my data shows that the amount of oil the United States produces has nothing to do with how much we drill. If we drill a lot more, we just drill less efficiently. And I got lots of data to show you that. So
how long has it been since we discovered an elephant field?
Well, fracking is kind of it's the whole bloody Permian. It's fracking has really made a difference. We should all thank or blame George Mitchell, because without that, the U.S. would be flat on its back without oil. And the environmentalists would say hooray, but I wouldn't. Speaking as an ecologist who thinks about resources. And then we talked about the United States, of course, going up and taking militarily all of Western Canada's oil and water. There was another discussion we had. I hope we don't.
Okay, Claude, do you want to go ahead?
I think Peter was in that group. I'd rather speak after he does.
Thank you, Claude.
Okay.
I was just going to add that one of the things that Charles shared with us was some research that he's assembling in a print form, so like an early preprint of a paper, in effect. Very interesting data when he talks about he's got the data to show. So he shared with us some of his data, and it is most impressive. That was my contribution. As you know, I came late into the meeting, and so I didn't hear most of the thesis that we were trying to discuss.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh,
Time is short, so I'll use this as an introduction for Fernand, who also had her hand up. But Dave, sharing pain definitely helps. Ask anyone who has enjoyed, or that isn't quite the right word, has been helped by group therapy. And I'm also, I think I have shared this in our hangout sessions. You don't have to be a clinician of any sort to join the American Public Health Association. And they have groups, subgroups. Actually, you can't keep track of everything on their emails. But mental health across the nation is really a big concern, and it's a growing concern. And so what do we do when half the population is on the verge of a nervous breakdown, which, you know, it's true that nobody knows what's going to happen, but the fact that food will become unaffordable for many because of the decreased use of energy is built into the cards. Anyway, I was delighted to find out in our little group that Fernand is actually, she has a great background as a clinician in psychoanalysis. And so take it away, Fernand, what you had something in mind that you wanted to say.
You're
Get
muted.
your microphone. Fernand, microphone.
Just looking.
Charlie, I'm
Okay,
working.
fine, yes. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, well, I'm not going to answer to that because I want to, we were talking about different forms of energy. We're talking a lot about energy, physical energy. And I think that what this little talk was about was other forms of energy that were being suggested that we could tap into. And I will just say in that in the AI, in the history of AI, we tend to focus on the text, chat GTP, and how and the consensus is that it's very dangerous. But in the development of AI, at first it was on games, and then it was on the folding protein. And when they focused on that and they cracked that code, they didn't patent it. They left it open to the world, and then you could see all the different centers around the world who took it and who started to apply it. So it's been a wonderful, a great contribution to human health, and it will be. So there are things in the horizon. There are new forces, new energies that are there, and we don't. You know, we can be a force as well by our emphasis and our directions.
Okay, thank you. Lily, go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry, I got to run for my meeting. So Mike, Claire, and I were in the same group here. I just want to say that, you know, there's a fundamental difference between a world that has been built upon Western philosophy alone, and that's where we are coming from in most of these conversations. The rich Eastern philosophies, as if it never existed before Aristotle, before Greece, is how we premise the whole world. So growing up in a Buddhist, Hindu, Vedic culture, from day one, it's our oneness with nature. I'm no different to nature. I am nature. I cannot control nature. I am nature. So the meditation practice alone, when I take a deep breath and I focus on where it's coming from, I learned that from a very young age. And where is that breath going after that? And how we share our breath with each other alone proves that. So the materialist world is being built upon a separation of the mind and the body without thinking about the consequences of nature. So there's a Buddhist principle called codependent co-arising, which proves that everything has a cause and an effect. And if you press something here, there's going to be an effect somewhere else in an interconnected universe. So a world that has been built on a philosophy which has separated the mind and body in a Cartesian split. Already the fissures are showing right now in where we are coming to in terms of the entropy spent that we have had in the last, especially the 200 years of the machine. So Mike and I talked about this in terms of the fundamental nature of all this, and how Nate kind of finding this out at this age for me was, wow, that we are not fields of energy. Wow. So is the way we, Mike and I, had a discussion. So, but the important thing is, at least now, even at this late stage, people are waking up to the fact that we are all interconnected. I am nature. I'm not separate from it. So how do we work from there? So it was a very rich discussion. Thank you for all the responses and all that. Too learned a lot. So I'll leave it to Mike to take it from here if that's okay. Thank you.
Mike, do you have anything to add?
Going at the wrong icon. Yeah, yeah. This whole notion that there's I hesitate in the company to call it a spiritual context to being human, but it's very much a part of our lives. You know, my father was a chemist and MD, and you know, he had a very materialist look at the world, and I tried to convince him that there was a spiritual realm, and he was totally miserable in his last years. And I was saying, you're feeling this. This is a spiritual experience. He wouldn't ever give in, right? And the fact that we can go and bomb and exploit and steal from other countries without having any compassion for the human beings there is something that we're more able to do because we've divorced ourselves from the more sensitive aspects of being human, and we're we're the recipients of that colonial power. You know, we've taken from the rest of the world an enormous scale. We consume something like 30% of the world's resources, and if we're looking for any sort of sustainability, we're going to have to relinquish some portion of what we've taken. And that's not a very popular thing. That's not going to come in by democracy. It's going to have to come in through some sort of a, may I say, spiritual awakening, some sort of a realization that, you know, that we've caused serious harm to the planet, to other nations, to whatever, that, you know, that consciousness rises in us. And we can only hope that the field or the impulse of those feelings is able to spread, not through conventional media, because the censorship that's going on in conventional medias is just mind-boggling. They don't even try to hide it anymore. If you want to say something that they don't agree with, they'll throw you in jail. You know, they'll ban your organization. They'll kick you out of university. They'll, bust your business. So we got a long way to go, and CACOR clearly knows what the problem is. We hear this all the time in all sorts of details, and about the technological solutions. But unless we can come up with some sort of a human aspect to go with that, we're stretching it. So, more fun, less stuff. That's just 4 syllables that interjects us into the possibility of living more from life and less from stuff. So, and we sort of talked around that, and we got a great chunk of Sri Lankan history. They've been in and out of horrendous stuff, and they're back into the convention, but at least they're not fighting.
Okay, David Darby.
So reaction first to this idea about sharing pain and group therapy, or whatever you want to call it, comes in many different forms. In my estimation, it will help one accept one's situation and what has happened to one, and to carry on as far as one can carry on, but it won't solve any problems other than that. So if, for example, you have post-traumatic stress because you were in a firefight, you can get some psychological help that'll allow you to continue to exist now that you're in a peaceful situation, but it sure as heck is not going to stop any future firefights. So that's what I had to say on that. The other thing I wanted to go back to this consciousness in organization, organized beings. I mean, they're organized chemicals, right? I just don't see this. yeah, I see this as happening in many different kinds of organisms, even some pretty basic ones, like some of the plants that we would put quite far down on the evolutionary tree. They seem to have awareness of their surroundings. Call it consciousness, if you will, but no, I do not see consciousness in the earth. I do not see consciousness in rocks. I do not see consciousness in water. And I could go on with many thousands of other materials. There is no consciousness in these materials, but they have organization. So I don't think that that is actually the basis on which one should be making this judgment. And I would challenge you, really, give me evidence of the consciousness of rocks.
Okay, let's
You-
move on. And Claude, you want
Dave,
to
maybe you
go
need a pet rock.
Ow.
I've had one before, didn't do me any good. It's just like a whole bunch of other things in life.
Did we
All
miss-
of the times that I've had counseling, yeah, well, it helped me deal with it, but sure didn't make the problem go away.
watch a crystal form.
Did
I've
Did
done
we-
that.
did we do group 4? Did we
Yeah.
do all the
Yeah.
groups?
That was
Yeah, we
Lewis and
got
I.
group 3 and group 4. You want our group 3? Someone there left?
So
Oh, that
can I
was
just?
3.
Oh, you were 3. Okay.
We were 3.
Group
So
4.
we
then.
should get their opinion.
Room 4. Anyone left?
That was Lilith and I, room 4.
Oh, okay. So we've heard from pretty well all the rooms then.
So can I respond to Dave? Just one more. I think we're on the same wavelength. You don't have to believe that rocks have a spirit. You can believe that the problem of climate change is going to go away no matter what you think about the Earth. But looking for solidarity and helping each other as we face disaster actually is maybe the most important thing we can do. And I'm quoting now James Hollis, Fernand. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's a Jungian psychologist that I really resonate with his teachings. And he says emotional resilience is the single most important thing we can do. And believe it or not, I consider this Zoom right here part of my group therapy, except we can't use the word therapy, even though we have a therapist, a practicing therapist. It isn't her session. So it can't be, it has to be a discussion group because, there's lawyers in the world. But every time you go into a discussion, who in your personal life where you can stand 6 feet and feel their electromagnetic pulses, who wants to talk about this? In my life, there's very few people, including my brother and sister, don't want to talk about it. And so I'm getting back to what Raymond said about a community doesn't have to be close. A community and the feeling and the working of our ideas and feelings actually can work quite well on Zoom because you can't find a community like this elsewhere.
Okay. Anyone else want to contribute to this? All right, because what I'm trying to do is trying to find some conclusion. I guess I did want to comment that I found what Nate had to say was very content rich and addressed so many dimensions that each one of us, and I think this was Ruben's intent of putting that forward, each one of us would get something different out of it and express it in a slightly different way. And I too did make a note of this this energetic field of 6 feet away, and to me, I'd never heard it expressed that way. But there is certainly something quite different from meeting people face to face, and it's more than body language. There is some other connectivity that goes on. And I find it with a group as well, that when I'm making a presentation, and maybe entertainers, they comment on it and say what a great crowd and all that. But to me, there's a connection that takes place. And I feel, very comfortable sometimes, and other times less so, because of I guess the audience and their reaction, and is that an electromagnetic field or whatever? I don't know, but there is a different feeling.
Do you want something that's a little off the plate?
Yeah.
I think that the solution does not lie, that the direction that civilization is going to take does not lie in this belief that a community can get it together and do the right thing. I don't think that we can find a dictator that can get it together and do the right thing for 8 billion people. But I actually believe that there will be individuals with enough personal power, and I don't mean dollar power, I mean personal ability to change 8 billion sets of behavior. Think of a graduate student in a biochemistry lab that's been manipulating genes, and he's come up with a virus that creates sterility in 8 billion people. Nobody knows that he's got it. He's all by himself. He's had all these inputs for 35 years of religion and family and education. And the decision lies in his hands. He can either release the virus and make 8 billion people sterile, which will have an enormous effect on how humans go forward in the world, because there'll always be some exceptions. There'll be some people left. But he basically takes out all childbearing decisions by taking this flask and releasing it into the atmosphere. Now, the alternative decision is that he puts it in his pocket, and he has to choose whether or not putting in his pocket will create more or less injuries than the injuries caused by sterilizing 8 billion people. The reason I bring this up is because I think that individual exists already.
I agree with that.
He exists already, and he's already facing the dilemma, and he has to make the choice on his own. There's no reason for him to include anybody else in the choice. He just has to be able to calculate how many people are going to be injured between now and 2100, which my number is 13.4 billion, or the real number, 8 billion people being sterile and not being allowed to have children. And he has to decide which of those injuries is bigger. And once he decides, then he knows whether or not he's going to put it in his pocket or release it. But if he puts it in his pocket, there's probably hundreds of replacements for him, so that graduate students that already have the capability, or maybe it's labs that have the capability, or maybe it's governments that have the capability. But the fact is, the capability will soon be here, and somebody will make that decision. And if they do, then the entire future of our civilization going forward during the next 80 years will be completely different.
Have you
Do
been
the
watching
polar
The
bears
Last of
get the
Us?
vote, Jack? Do
Pardon?
the polar bears get the vote? Do the wolves get the vote?
It depends upon how this graduate student values a polar bear. He says he may be releasing it and take humans out of the equation for no other reason than he thinks the polar bear has a right to be here and we're taking it away. But it's still all these different graduate students that are gaining this capability. Whatever they decide, whatever they value is completely personal to them. The outcome's the same. The human population will drop at 100 million people a year for 80 years.
Yeah, Peter McKinnon, you were nodding your head.
Oh, I just put my hand up to compliment Jack's comments. I was a clap. It wasn't my hand like this. Thanks.
Okay.
So I'm actually making a short video for Charlie. It's only going to be 3 minutes long. I can send you the URL if you want to see the the script. I don't have the thing animated yet, but I think that represents the highest probability future for our civilization. Has nothing to do with what our groups think or what our religions think or what our governments do. It's completely independent. It's only what this one person thinks.
This is one of my grave concerns as well, Jack, about the advancements in artificial intelligence. And I've written about 10 op-eds in the last few months with another colleague. And the main theme is that AI is going to be fantastic, but if we don't get some kind of control, guidelines, guardrails, regulations,
Right.
it could destroy everything.
Yes. But all it's going to take is the one guy.
Yes, the one guy
who escapes the controls that you would like to see put in place.
That's right.
And we end up with The Last of Us.
Yes, that's the concern. How do we make these controls? How do we enforce them?
Well,
Well, I don't think you can.
99% of all species that have ever existed on the earth are extinct.
Yeah.
And so maybe we ought to, and we will be eventually, I assume. And so whatever, it's just a matter of timing, Jack.
Okay, but here's the thing. As a biologist, it's actually quite apparent. There are many species. Yes, I agree with your 99% number, but there are many species that have been in existence for a very long time. For example, the coelacanth.
Yep.
Horseshoe crabs.
All kinds of them. Yeah, horseshoe crab.
But I would not like to lose. I would not like to lose Mozart. I mean, that's my problem.
Sorry, he's gone.
No, I actually think
Mahler.
keep Mozart. I think we can keep best. That we could collapse the 8 billion down to 50 million and save all the art and all the music and most of the thinking capabilities. They do have to live under a different social contract, and I've explained that in a previous CACOR talk. But it's getting
I push the button.
Pardon?
I do it.
I know. I can't believe the number of friends that have responded by saying, I wouldn't put it in my pocket, I would release it. They've already come to the conclusion that we're more of a plague in our current state than we would be as a community of 50 million people living inside some small boundary somewhere with 95%
How
of
do you
the earth
titrate 50 million, Jack?
The 50, because that's all the energy I have, 96,000 kilowatt hours.
Sure, but it could be zero.
From
So Peter, jump in, please.
Well, continuing on Dave's point about life has been around for a while, there was a paper that was published this week announcing the discovery of living bacteria in rock that is 2 billion years old. This happened the rock is from South Africa, and the experiment is an international team, and it's living bacteria. And so they're now planning to do genome studies of this bacteria.
Have they been reproducing, or they're just in?
Well, they believe they've been living in a completely isolated ecosystem.
Okay, so it's important to understand that
inside a igneous rock.
This is actually not a new finding, by the way.
No, it's not a new
one. For about 30 years,
they did have 100 million. Yeah, there are 100 million. This is 2 billion. This is quite amazing. Anyway, just to carries on your line about life's been around and some species have been around for a long time. Thank you.
Actually, I'm interested in what Dave had to say, because I'm thinking with that rock, maybe there's a possibility that the bacteria came from elsewhere and are able to over time travel to some degree, like not like us obviously, but they should be able to move around, right?
Well, one thing is almost certain: the bacteria that are in there are not extremely old. The individual cells, they'll be something on the order of days old. Most bacteria don't even last days. They don't even last hours.
Well, just like us. I mean, humans have been around for let's say quarter million years. We're clearly different humans as we've gone through our life cycles. The same would be the case with these bacteria, but they've been living isolated. They believe that the scientists who did the study believe that they were isolated in this rock and were living in their own ecosystem.
What are they
Yes,
eating?
More research
the cells
required.
aren't 2 billion years old.
Okay,
The
okay, they're
life
not
form-
eating anything. Bacteria don't have mouths. That's the first
That's
thing
right.
to understand. So they don't
They
eat.
absorb stuff.
What they do
Come
is
on.
they don't eat. They absorb
Yeah.
materials
Yeah,
from
yeah, yeah,
their
yeah. I'm a
surrounding environment.
biologist, please. But what are they absorbing?
Well, they're using chemosynthesis.
From what energy source? Are they don't have access to sun, do they?
No.
They have
So
geothermal.
for all intents and purposes, you can think of the model of the black smokers at the bottom of the oceans.
So they're
which-
using reduced sulfur or something for a
Yeah,
fuel?
they're not using oxygen as their electron acceptor. They're using sulfur. Or they could be using something else. Because I haven't read the paper yet. They may
So-
not know.
So this actually reminds me of how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, because it says nothing about the coming crisis. As we
Sure.
speak, 5.5 million people are leaving their homes before landfall later on today. 5.5 million people is the entire population of Minnesota, just to give it a perspective.
Mhm.
And that's less than 2 weeks after the last hurricane hit. And it doesn't have to come across the Atlantic anymore. It's coming across the Gulf of Mexico, going from a named tropical storm. Within like 36 hours, it turns into a Cat 5.
Yep.
This is a new regime we're in.
Yep.
And that doesn't make any difference whether or not those bacteria,
Well, one thing we do know is the bacteria will survive.
Yes.
If they're isolated.
But that's more of a picture of how desperate our psyches are. That we're trying to grab something, like, we're going to go extinct? You mean there won't be any more polar bears? Michael Dowd last year gave a sermon. He says anything bigger than this won't survive in North America. Any mammal bigger than this, they're going to have to burrow into the ground to survive. And this is obviously speculation. Nobody, to go to Charles' point, that nobody really knows what's going to happen. But it's as hard to imagine when everybody is hunting and scavenging and maybe even killing each other to get at each other's food, on a mass starvation scale. How are we going to get down to the 1 billion, or Jack is still here but listening, whether you count it in millions or 1.5 billion, it's way more than 8.2 billion. And, that's going to be a really messy process. And I'm glad that most of us are old enough that we probably won't see the worst of it, with a few exceptions. Raymond, you've got.
Thank you. I'll take that.
Oh,
as
you
well.
think he's going to be an exception?
No, I think that he has a chance. He won't die with the first wave of discretionary, disease that comes through.
Discretionary?
Oh, not discretionary. I'm thinking of Adam Fennick's wonderful presentation. We haven't been able to get him to come back and talk to us, but basically he says that it's not going to be the heat. It's not going to be the winter that kills you without energy. What's going to happen is that after 3 months of starvation diets, it's susceptible for anything, including the diseases that are already in your body and already in your lungs. So opportunistic, that's the word I was looking for.
Right,
Opportunistic
right.
disease will come through and hit most of us. That's not me talking, that's Adam Fennick, okay? Don't listen to me. I don't have any credentials.
Yeah,
You people do.
The
Well-
United States eats only 5% of the corn it produces. And the rest goes to animals or goes to fuels. I am not one that sees necessarily starvation on the immediate horizon, at least and the same could be said for Manitoba, for either the US or Canada. I just don't see it. The prairies are so productive, even now. And especially if you got a little bit of nitrogen fertilizer, So
Well,
Now,
collapse
you
will
don't have-
imply that that's no longer available. Collapse will imply that you're not going to have 500 horsepower tractors running back and forth, satellite controlled, as
that's
my
why I
extended
think
family
energy
does.
is the
by
ultimate
way.
issue, the ultimate limiting factor. So in that sense, I agree with you, I think.
Well,
Well,
what
the
is,
other
but
factor is
Charlie,
that, for example,
what-
in Canada, we produce huge amounts of food that we export, but we also import huge amounts of food. And if we didn't do that, we would not be able to have balanced diets that keep us healthy.
well, you export carbohydrates and you import fish and stuff. High.
Charlie, what about
protein.
Pimentel's argument that the world can only support 600 million people without fossil fuels?
I think that's
I think that's
closer.
But
very
I
high.
don't see us being without fossil fuels. I see us being with less and less over time.
In Tampa,
What-
excuse me, in Tampa, they ran out of gas, and
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
have police escort of convoys bringing the gas in trucks, and they're going to allow enough people to, more people to leave, because they can't leave Tampa. They don't have gas to drive their cars. So the fact that they need police escorts tells you that it'll be a problematic, even though there's still hydrocarbons in the ground, they're going to be targets for many things, including people just saying, there's a tanker that would last me for years, I'm going to grab it.
Well, if we can
Charlie,
get
Charlie,
tankers of gas and get people to leave the planet, then that would solve Jack's problem.
So let's
Charlie-
convince them,
Charlie, you
wasn't there
just
a
said-
cult or they were going to leave the planet? They just have to take this little drink and
Charlie,
Okay.
you said the energy's going down. We don't know
I
how
think we're
fast or-
degrading here.
But do you have some idea? Do you have some estimate of how much energy we might have in 2180 years? Does it get easier to predict
Fossil
as you get?
fuel, I would guess we'd have 20% of what we have now.
More than's good for us.
Yeah, but keep in mind how much energy comes from that big nuclear reactor in the sky and the wind. There's
Yeah, but it takes a huge amount of fossil fuel to make all the devices to capture it.
doesn't have to. The supply chain could be decarbonized. We don't need fossil fuels to make all of that.
I have a paper submitted to Nature about how the estimates of the EROI for solar are much too high.
And Bill Reese would agree with you. Again, I don't know as much as you do, so I feel funny jumping into this argument here. But Bill Reese even says that an electric car, really, it has such a huge carbon footprint. Maybe you're better off just not driving, or drive an old car that already exists. Don't build another car if you don't have to on the
That's what
planet.
I do.
Yeah.
So Claude, public transport or biking or why? Well, public transport if it's electric, by the way.
Bicycle. You're right. I
Right?
agree with you on bicycle.
Because
Ray,
public
but in
transport.
this country, in my letter to you that you put in your trash can, I was arguing that an electric car that is made from electricity that's made from fossil fuel, which is the case in the U.S., not Canada, in the U.S. runs at the same efficiency as an electric car, except the electric car uses 3 times more copper.
So what I would say is everything in the supply chain to produce an electric vehicle could be decarbonized. So the mining, the processing,
all
the
of that comes
transport.
out of the net from
altogether.
all of that comes out of the net
Charlie.
from the solar, which is only about 4 or 5% of energy use on the planet, is the PV and wind turbines.
That's if you look at it from a primary energy perspective. If you look at it from a useful energy perspective, we get a lot more than that.
Yeah, but that you're putting it on the planet in the US.
Okay, 15%. I'll grant you that, Ray. I'll grant you 15%.
And nobody said geothermal, did you notice?
Yeah, nobody said geothermal. It's the most misunderstood source of energy in the least.
Well, wait a minute. In the geysers in California, the rocks are cooling. Do you know that?
Yeah, sure. You're extracting heat from below, and it's an insulator of sorts. So sure, eventually those deep wells that you drill, the delta T is going to decrease.
If you're lucky, somebody will do that down there at Yellowstone and the thing won't go off as a super volcano.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You make it crack. Anyway, look,
More wishful thinking, Dave.
what I'd like to do is to wind this up. And
There's another book there somewhere.
I think it's been a very interesting discussion. I'm going to stop the recording.
Problem.